All right, Yosh asked me to introduce her by playing a 2-minute video from just sort of it's an introduction to the work of the feminist workshop, which she is the head of.
And it's dynamite, y'all. I love this.
Yeah. Yosh, thank you for joining us. I want to acknowledge it is midnight, I believe, in Ukraine time. And so thanks for staying up, and we're not going to keep you up all night. But, you know, this...
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. I do want to start off, we actually already, we donated like $250 on behalf of Veterans for Peace to the Feminist Workshop tonight. In sort of like a token of our solidarity with the people of Ukraine, victims of war. And this webinar today, I believe, symbolizes an attempt to bring the voices of the people of Ukraine into the debate, into the conversation that we in the left movement, the progressive movement here in the United States are having. And it's really difficult because sometimes I think, especially intellectuals and activists on the left, we see the situation in Central and Eastern Europe as a big video game or a chessboard, and the people of Eastern Ukraine are the pawns in this imperialist standoff between, you know, the United States imperialist, which we are very familiar with here in the U.S., the belly of the beast and so forth. And what we're not so familiar with is the concerns of people in Eastern Europe have with their neighbor, who can be, described as also an imperialist power, especially in Eastern Europe. So I'm going to get off my soapbox there. Stop. I want to start. Thank you, Yosh, for being on tonight, and tell us about. I want to know about what your activism was like before the recent invasion, and what's it been like since the most recent invasion, and
Yeah, so actually, for this particular moment, our activities quite similar to what we have been doing before the full-scale invasion. but it's just all our activities include something in different ways connected to the current situation. And so before the full-scale invasion, our main purpose is to build a feminist community in Lviv and in Ukraine. And we work with community, organizing some events, educational events or non-formal events, and producing content. During COVID, we started to work more in online. We built communities around our Instagram or around our video content on YouTube. So we were spreading feminist ideas and developing a feminist agenda, mainly with young people, queer young people. And sometimes we did some all Ukrainian projects or international projects and worked on this agenda with our colleagues. But when the war started, as you saw in this video, we focused at the beginning of full-scale invasion, we focused more on humanitarian assistance, and we started to do this kind of work which we have never done before. For this moment, we are supporting 2 shelters. We organized 2 shelters, each for 20 people. First for women and children and pets, and second for families with children. And also this girl you saw on the video is who's babysitting. She's also work with us and continue to do this work. And also this program of supporting with some products and individual request of elderly women is still exist, but big part of our work is still on organizing feminist community and in Lviv. So Lviv is a more safe part of Ukraine, and we knew that we will have many refugees, many people who will be coming from more dangerous regions of Ukraine. So many quite powerful activists and interesting personalities came to Lviv, and our community now is more powerful and big because of these people. And we try to support different ideas of activists, and one of our big challenge now is to how to build this international solidarity, because if before the full-scale invasion we found more common challenges and common problems, but now it is became more challenging and to find common language and common ground for our feminist colleagues. We faced the situation when, of course, our work is possible because of funds and support of Western countries. Our people in our community who do all the work, most of these people are not so rich and privileged people, so we can't do this all this work without financial support. So that's why we need to fundraise constantly. And we faced this huge amount of donors coming to Ukraine and showing some also imperial or colonial practices with our civil society. So many of them are like trying to be white saviors in Ukraine, even though we in Ukraine also quite white, but their best policies was developed in countries which are not so good developed as Ukraine, and with maybe countries with not such powerful civil society. So they have their own best practices and understanding how to solve any problem we have during the war, and they try to implement these best practices while sitting in their safe offices and receiving big salaries and giving peanuts for grassroots activists. So on the one hand, we have this struggle against Russian imperialism, and on the other hand, we have this struggle with Western imperialism, and their not lacking of understanding of how they producing these colonial relationships during the war in Ukraine. And yeah, if to speak how also war changed what we are doing, is that, for example, we organize some meetings, or we organize some, or we produce some educational materials, and often it will be materials about the war situation, about experience of women during the war, or how, because many women are involved in military. Probably you heard that about 30% of Ukrainian military are women. So, and our feminist colleagues in Western countries also often don't understand us. How can we support our military being a feminists? Because for them, it's something, military is something anti women rights, something too patriarchal. And before the full-scale invasion, our organization is totally anti-militaristic, and we used to organize some theoretical events or some events with researchers, and we was criticizing the consequences of process of militarization. And we do this now also, but it is connected with support of those people, of our comrades who went to army. And so the process is like that, that we, at the same time, we thinking about our future. For example, we are thinking how this long war and militarization of our society will influence women's rights and domestic violence, for example. And at the same time, we are supporting those people in military, because there are people who are, for example, feminist or LGBTQ plus activists. So also these people can support the process of democratization, and the fight with discrimination and so on. So now we have a lot of challenges in different fields, but yeah, we are staying strong and continue to work. Maybe now I will stop, and if you have any questions, we can continue.
I do. I have so many questions. I watched the video and I read your website. Hello, Yosh. My name is Steph.
Hello.
And I was so very impressed with what you do, because it's just, I looked at all the things that you do, and it's just women helping women negotiate, even with the war aside, right? Women historically helping women do just to get through their day on a very basic level, like the childcare, like providing childcare so that a woman can go stand on queue to receive benefits, or the elder care for older women and single women who need a meal preparation. I was very, very touched by the apartment and the small things. So if you haven't seen it, everyone, the apartment is the best thing that I can think of describing is if you lived in New York and you went out to LA, and while you were gone, New York was bombed and you could not return back to New York, but you were in LA in an Airbnb, and it wasn't your things or your stuff, but you could stay there a little bit longer and then move on. But while you're there, people are making small contributions to make it more hospitable for the people who come after them. So I was very impressed by how the people that come to the feminist apartment are making it better than when they arrive, by leaving something and being considerate of the people who come after them. This feels like kind of women's work, what we have always done in taking care of each other or trying to anticipate. And so there's that work. And now you have the added factor of the invasion. And I just want to know how much more difficult has it become because of the invasion? I mean, what are the differences that you are noticing between now and a year ago? Like, how has your work changed within 1 year? Is it hard? Is it more difficult? Is just more demand? How has your life changed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we quite used to this in these conditions with, for example, we almost every day we have a raid alarm, and it's quite annoying, but we quite used for this, and curfew. But we like, yeah, I feel that most of my friends and myself also, we don't have so much energy. At the beginning of invasion, I felt like running and working a lot, really a lot, and searching for possibilities, for connections, for money. And now we're quite exhausted, but at the same time, we learned how to maintain this way of life during the war. And a lot of people came back from abroad and choose to live in Ukraine, and found it more comfortable to live during the war. But it is not because this is comfortable, but because the conditions for refugees, for Ukrainians, of course, European countries are more welcoming for Ukrainian refugees than for some other refugees. Not so white maybe, but it is difficult. It is not the same as living in your own country, speaking your own language, and receiving some support from your relatives and friends and so on. And if to speak about our NGO activities, is at the beginning of the war, I managed to find a lot of money to open the shelters, to start new activities, and now different foundations starting to close their programs. And we face that some shelters are closing in our cities and people don't know where to live, and we have new people coming to our city because of new shellings, and we don't know where to search the money for this, for our humanitarian work and our regular work. And most of foundations, they are willing to support big structures, big professional NGOs, but most of them not willing to support real civil society and real grassroots organizations and grassroots initiatives and small non-registered initiatives, and this what we are trying also to do is to support our comrades who don't have registered bodies. So yeah, it's became harder because of financial aspect.
Thank you, Yosh. I'm hoping you'll be able to stay with us to the question and answer after we hear from Vladislav and Stephen. Much appreciation. Vladislav, I'm gonna go to you. Professor Zunes is getting set up. He had to just drive a long way. He has to get all set up. So we are gonna go to you. Maybe pull you in, spotlight. First, good evening.
Good midnight.
Hey, the title of this webinar is it's confused a lot of people. It's called can Russia's invasion of Ukraine be rationalized or even justified by Western expansionism? And that's a mouthful. And it was my bright idea for that title. And apparently everybody hates it. But I picked that title because it's been about 400 days now since the Russian Federation did the full-scale invasion of your country, and I'm pretty active on the left, and my interpretation of what I've heard from our left are basically rationalizations and justifications for Russia's invasion. I've heard NATO went back on its promises. I've heard about security red lines from Mr. Putin. You know, and I've heard a lot of that. Of course, I've also heard about Nazis. I've heard about fascists, a whole entire army of Ukrainian fascists, the Azov Brigade, and so on and so forth as well. So I went out looking for a fellow leftist progressive, and I found you, a historian of Central and Eastern Europe, and I'm hoping you could answer some of those questions for me, and maybe somebody else learn something along with me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so surreal that main position on the left in the US that two imperialist countries, Russia and US, should strike a deal and divide Ukraine in some way, and that this is their anti-imperialism, and just awful to hear. And a lot of people just automatically took this position, automatically accept that for some reason Russia have any legitimate claims about Ukraine's sovereignty, so they can talk about, okay, NATO broke some promises to Russia, how it relates to Ukraine. Ukraine didn't have any promises to Russia that it broke, and it just it strikes me a lot how imperialist and close to, I don't know, to Trumpist Kissingerian style politics some on the left in the US become, and it's a real tragedy. But yeah, I want to start my speech with notions that some time ago on this month there was an important date of 20 years from the start of horrible invasion of US in Iraq, and all of this war on terror and all of that imperialism and war crimes that were happening in Iraq. And I think not much people know that not only US had war on terror, but also the same situation was in Russia. And even before the invasion of Iraq, there was an invasion to Chechen Republic with the same rhetoric that Russia should fight terrorism, that they're all terrorists, that we need to just go there and prevent all this base of terrorism that just spreads all over Russia and so on and so on. And that was a pretext for first Chechen war that practically was waged by Russia and killed 8% of all the population of the country. of civilian population, of people who participate in popular resistance against Russian invasion. And all of this was happening by the same pretext as the invasion of America to Iraq, that we are fighting against terror, we are fighting against these terrorist people. Of course, they're all, majority of the people in Ichkeria in Chechen Republic were Muslim, so there was also this Islamophobia and all of this context. But what is important that this war, with the same claims that the war in Iraq, gave actually a lot of legal reasoning and possibility for US to actually push with Iraq, because they saw that, okay, Russia can invade, and Russia didn't have any international courts, any opposition from the human rights, strong opposition from the human rights movements or the governments of other countries, and that after they failed horribly, they still struck a peace deal that practically puts Russia in advantage. So this ignorance of invasion to Chechen Republic gave ground and gave more possibility, more weight for US then to wage war in Iraq. And with Russia waging its war against terrorism, they were pretty in alignment with American invasion of Iraq. And they were saying, okay, they're fighting terrorism too, so we need to support them or at least ignore this. And by the precedent of war on terror that was going on in Russia, there became a lot more ground for US to start to do their horrible war crimes. And this interconnectivity and intermotivations were actually very strong between Russian and American imperialism. Because after this, Russia broke any peace deals that it had with Chechen Republic and invaded it again. And on this time, this invasion was going until capitulation of Chechen Republic and complete occupation. And in this case, NATO countries actually cooperate with Russia. They sold them weapons. They supported them diplomatically. There is even a famous moment of Tony Blair visiting Russia in times of Second Chechen War, when Russian soldiers were mass killing Chechen civilians and bombing their countries, to negotiate a deal about trade of weapons, and to say that, okay, Russia have also their so-called terrorist problems that they need to deal with, and that West, at least not publicly, but should support Russia in waging this war. Practically, all of this ignorance of international community and support of the NATO countries of invasion and support of Russia of invasion of Iraq created really awful situation of disregarding of international law and democracy, and possible acceptance of international community of both of these wars and of their legitimation, and that legitimacy of peace, for example, in Chechen Republic and in Iraq, practically creates the grounds for another imperialist invasions after. And Russia didn't stop when their ambitions in Chechen Republic were done. After the occupation of Chechen Republic, it moved on with the invasion of Georgia, and after this, with invasion of Ukraine in the east and annexation of Crimea. The same politics of cooperation between NATO and Russia were also, even during these wars, even when NATO and Russian interests started to collide, there still was a lot of wish from both sides to find cooperation and compromise and ignore each other war crimes and each other horrible deeds to find some inter-imperialist cooperation. In terms of Ukraine, it was meant that when Russia first invaded, West tried to force Ukraine to compromise and to negotiate a peace deal with Russia. It practically gave born to Minsk agreements that are now also pushed a lot by so-called pacifist left as reasoning for legitimation of Russian invasion, that Ukraine didn't follow these peace agreements, these Minsk agreements that were forced on Ukraine by Western countries and Russia. But in fact, Ukraine was following them. And also, what is important, that actually now with the start of the war, Russian officials clearly stated that their intentions with Minsk was not to follow it and to achieve any sustainable peace, but to actually give more legitimacy and casus belli to invade Ukraine. So now they're telling this openly in their interviews. People who wrote Minsk agreements from the Russian side are telling that it was a pretext for invasion, that it wasn't a deal that they thought will last. So practically compromises with Russian imperialism at that time and international community stance that didn't support needs for sending weapons to Ukraine. At the time, for example, administration of Obama administration said that they won't send any lethal weapons to Ukraine, and all of the passivity in terms of sanctions created the possibility for invasion to continue into 2022 with full-scale invasion. And actually, all of this passivity and all of this reaction by the Western countries and international community, the lack of military support for Ukraine, gave very serious cracks in international law and very serious possibility for invasion, which happened in 2022 with argument, with practically Russia seeing the West didn't react on the first invasion and they give it a go. And now a lot of justification are flying around that it was about NATO expansion, about others like US didn't do some dealings, Ukraine didn't do something, but in fact, it's justifications that are dropping on the Western audience. And what Russian officials saying on their TV, on their state media, is that Ukrainians are subhumans that need to be assimilated, that Ukraine was always a part of Russian Empire or Russian state, and that they're the same Russians, and that Ukraine need to be denazified, including killings of Ukrainian children. It's something that they're telling on state TV. And as the arguments of legitimation of this invasion, they're actually speaking about Iraq war. They're saying, if US could invade Iraq, why we couldn't invade Ukraine? We have the same legitimate reasons. If one imperialist can go kill a bunch of people and push their interests, we could do it too. And nobody says anything about NATO expansionism, about Russian people being oppressed, about any of the stuff that's thrown around for the West. They're saying just very straightforward that Ukrainians are subhumans, that Americans can do imperialism. It means that we are also can do imperialism and attack the territories that are deemed by our ideology as ours. So a lot of this motivation and a lot of actions of Russian imperialism are not justified by the actions of the West, but by the internal logic of Russian imperialism and its aggression, and also are motivated by other breaches in international law done by other imperialists, most importantly by the US and its invasion of Iraq. All of the series of compromises and peace deals and ignorance of international community to all of this invasion before, to invasion of Chechen Republic, to invasion of Iraq, to invasion of Georgia, gave the possibility, and to invasion of Ukraine 8 years later, before, gave the possibility for Russia to go on with this invasion and to push for their imperialist claim again. With all of this imperialist invasion before being unopposed, there's a clear window of opportunity for imperialist countries to push their goals. And it is important thing that we should, as a left, address. I think that it is important now to build international, universal solidarity against all of this aggression, all of these imperialist wars, and give no exceptions of our solidarity. That we need to support all the countries equally who are facing imperialist aggression, be it Ukraine or be it any other country. We need to strongly show rule of law, of democracy, and of principles of self-determination and rights for subjectivity and sovereignty of countries. And this including now giving all of the help that Ukraine needs, including macro-financial help, humanitarian help, and more military help that can help Ukrainians to win this war. In fact, also a lot of people saying that it's a proxy war and that US fights with Ukrainian hands against Russian, which, well, practically it's absolutely racist take or xenophobic because it denies any subjectivity for 30 million people here and just says that they're fighting on somebody's pretext and wish and not by their own interest, and they are incapable of having their own interest, but just a proxy for US or CIA or any other great power. But in fact, it's something that you won't see in Ukraine ever. You go here and you see an incredible support for the struggle against imperialism from any person, from all of the society engaged very directly on opposing its oppressors. And in fact, they don't have any questions about how just this war and should they fight or not, because question and answer on this question very obvious for all of them. Recent surveys that were done about Ukrainians and territorial concessions shows that more than 87% of Ukrainians are against any territorial concessions to Russia for achieving peace. They don't want to sell any of don't want to sell any of our people. We don't want any compromise with authoritarian states. We don't want any compromise with ethnic cleansing, repressions, mass killings, and all of the horrible invasion that goes against our people. And what is also important, in this survey, there was differentiation by language and nationality. And from this 87%, 76% of Russian-speaking population of Ukraine have the same opinion, that they don't want to compromise any of territory, including Donbas or Crimea, with Russian imperialism. They don't want to let their people be occupied, killed, repressed, murdered. They want to defend their families, their friends. They want to return to their homes that are occupied. So it's not the issue of ethnicity or nationality. Even people who are Russian-speaking, who logically you can have like ideas that they probably would support Russia more because it's a country with their language and so on and so on. But in fact, it's not true. Absolute majority of these people also supports struggle against Russian imperialism and don't want to take any compromises with it. The same goes for the people who live in the East. You can hear a lot of myths about so-called self-determination of people in Donbas. In fact, with the start of the war, a lot of Russian officials became more honest about what was going on when the war started by occupying Donbas. And what you can hear from officials, Russian military officials, what they're saying, that they just go straight in and forced by the gun everyone to support separation and so on and so on. That there was no mass support for Russian occupation of Donbas region, even of Crimea. And it also perfectly goes with this survey that shows that 80% of people who are living on the east of Ukraine, in the unoccupied parts of Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts, on people who moved from this oblast because of threat from like being internally displaced people, 80% of them are supporting fight for the complete victory and opposing any territorial concessions. Of course, all of these people need any help, including and especially military help, to defend their rights, to defend their homes against Russian occupation. And it's not some issues that are pretty far away from us, and okay, we want weapons and so on and so on. It's like not a secondary question, because it's very directly affects our lives. For a lot of people, it's question of life and death. It's question whether they survive or not. For me, for example, if not American anti-air anti-air systems, I probably wouldn't have a possibility to speak with you, because on my districts are always flying rockets, and just incredible amount of rockets and drone strike are going in my district. And without this modern anti-air equipment, I probably would be gone for now. So it's very important question, and practically it's the first question for majority of Ukrainian, absolute majority of Ukrainian population. So we cannot absolutely ignore it and speak about only non-military issues. It's a situation that this war, as just as anything could be, there's such a clear evil and good side in this conflict that there couldn't be any mistakes who to support and why. In Ukraine, it's a people's war. People are organizing on the streets to collect donations to send them to the military. We are organizing with trade unions to support members of trade unions who are going in the army, and people in the frontline sectors who are fighting with direct military equipment and humanitarian help. It's something that all of Ukrainians engaged, and not only Ukrainians, but also people of other nationalities. For example, there was a recent news that American journalist joined Crimean Tatar battalion after going to Ukraine and seeing how clear was who is the enemy and how much people need support and help. And it was, I think, a transgender woman soldier from US who was working as a journalist. And she just straight away joined the battalion of Crimean Tatars. Also interesting fact that this battalion is named after a socialist leader of Crimean Republic 100 years ago. So it's also about the repression against socialists and all of these myths. She joined and practically now fighting with Crimean Tatar battalion. We also have battalions of other nationalities actively engaging in struggle against Russian imperialism. So it's not only a struggle of Ukrainian people, but of all of the people who are living in Ukraine, including Russian people who are opposing Russian imperialism. I think it's very important to say. And
Vladislav, we have to move on to Professor Zunes.
Okay.
But do you want to say something?
3 minutes about our activities.
All right. One quick question I had for you though, sir. When I talk to fellow activists, some of the activists I know actually received tours of occupied Crimea after Russia's invasion. They're organized by Russian pro-Russian forces, and what they quote unquote learned from these tours is the stage. What they came away with the stage was set basically from the Maidan movement of late 2013, and this movement was basically a CIA coup. There was a democratically elected Russia-friendly government. Everything was fine. The CIA came in. They overthrew this popular man, and then everything's been terrible since. And Russia, and then maybe there was oppression in the Donbass of other similar pro-Russian people. My understanding is you have some direct connections to that movement in 2013. I just want to give you a chance in closing, like what was your personal feelings and motivations and activities during the late 2013 period?
Yeah, our organization was founded as a left-wing and trade union movement of people who supported Maidan revolution. And practically it was a revolution of against extremely corrupt, like caricaturishly corrupt government that adopted dictatorial laws and pushing for Russificational laws, disregarding Ukrainian population, and trying to push Ukraine in direction of Russian imperialism and direction of authoritarianism and Russification. So it's something that we are in our core values of democracy and freedom we're opposing, and we try to unite with trade union movement to push in the Maidan not only for democratic demands, but also for demands of social security, like guarantees for trade unions, and trying to push a social direction of this revolution. On the Maidan movement, I think, well, all the biggest trade unions are joined, and even the trade unions that were previously loyal to the government, they were just straight going in because they were pissed about what was going on, and everyone took on the street. And in process of Maidan, there were push of adopting a lot of so-called dictatorial laws. It was a nickname that was popular in the population, and our government practically was moving in the direction that now of Belarus, that of direction of more authoritarianism, strong connection to Russian imperialism, and complete disregard of Ukrainian culture. For example, there is this talk about oppression of Russian people in the Donbass, but in fact, in the reality, at that time, it was nearly impossible to find a modern translation of book in Ukrainian. You go to bookshop, all of the all books in Russian. Everything just was Russian was default language, and usually Russian speaking were pretty privileged in Ukraine, and Ukrainian speakers were practically given no space at all. So there was this strong problem that was directly addressed by the Maidan revolution, but also there was a straight up problem with literally laws that were giving dictatorial powers to the president, which they absolutely opposed. After the Maidan revolution, after the corrupt government was overthrown, there was found that the president had literally a golden toilet in his palace that he built on the corruption money. So it's just laughable how it's primitively absurd amount of corruption was done by this government. And this all claims of democratically elected government and so on and so on. Well, it was opposed by the millions of people, including trade unions, including workers, when this government tried to push for dictatorial reforms and disregarding of majority of population. And I don't think that there's more clear examples of revolution as this. And it's a strange thing for the leftists to oppose a revolution against authoritarian governments. So we participated in this, and after the Maidan revolution, Russia invaded, and it strongly changed the direction of Ukrainian politics. Before, there was all of this democratizational potential of Maidan revolution. People were self-organizing, a lot of community for self-help, like grassroots movements and so on and so on. But after the war started, everything was about the war. All the democratic stuff of the Maidan revolution and potential was stopped, and practically a lot of disproportionate power was gained for the people who had military experience and could defend Ukraine against imperialist invasion. And these people were far right, and because of this, a lot of politics in Ukraine became very war-centered, and far right had influence because of the invasion, and a lot of potentials that Maidan revolution had, including social potential, were just thrown away with the invasion starting, and everyone just was speaking about the war, and it gave a lot less space for us to push left-wing ideas and practically just put us out of any public discussions for a lot of time. But now actually this war firstly disempowered far right strongly, because before the war was with the limited space, and far right were domineering in the volunteers, and now it's people's war and everyone participating, including socialists, anarchists, social democrats, trade unionists, who are we actively help and who are also our members who are participating in the army. And because of this, far right lose its privileged position as like solely defenders of Ukraine who have like strong military power. Now they don't have this power because all of society participates in it. And I think it's very important point when people speaking about Maidan revolution as some Nazi coup. Far right gave influence because of the Russian invasion, and now it's losing influence because of this war, because people are participating, and because left-wing people are participating in it, it gives us incredible legitimacy. And as a movement, we've grown twice from the start of the war, doing the activities that are directly on the agenda of the people, like supporting humanitarily people near frontline, defending workers' rights and labor rights in times of the war, and participating in the army. It's all gave incredible trust to the left in the people, and actually pushed a lot and gave a lot of space for us. And it's practically what we are doing now, and actually hoping that it will give enough space for real left-wing policies in Ukraine. So yeah, sorry for taking so much time.
That's all right. Thank you, sir. We are going to, Vladislav, I hope you'll stay with us for the question answer. It's almost 1 a.m. Your time. So thank you. And I see you got your coffee going on.
Yeah. I am absolutely full on it to answer everything, because when I go on the events, I just prepared it will be long, and I need just to go straight, so it will be very productive, and people just would have all of their questions. So yeah, it's okay for me.
Professor Zunes, thank you for joining us. We heard earlier from Yosh and her activism with the Feminist Workshop. We just heard from Vladislav, a local historian, and you, sir, are a local to me historian at the University of San Francisco. So, thanks for joining us. My friend Rebecca Solnit said I had to have you on because you were the best person to deal with these questions I have regarding NATO. Just this weekend, I went to a protest that was billed as a peace in Ukraine protest, and one of the main slogans was abolish NATO. But I was morally conflicted because there wasn't any demands for Russia to actually leave Ukraine. So that seemed like a moral conflict for me.
Certainly. Well, those of us who've wanted to abolish NATO for years have been greatly set back by the Russian invasion. Putin has done more to strengthen NATO than anybody, bringing even Finland and Sweden, who maintained their steadfast neutrality throughout the Cold War, to join, to NATO countries increasing their military budget for the alliance to be more unified than ever. And as someone who hoped NATO would have been abolished at the end of the Cold War, this has certainly been politically problematic. I'm actually a political scientist by training, not a historian, but I do, I look at a lot of modern diplomatic history in my work. And, I built something of a reputation of being someone who has really repeatedly pointed out how the United States has created many of the worst crises and humanitarian disasters and wars and dictatorships in the world. It's made me a target of Fox News and even a lot of mainstream liberals that I keep reminding, people about U.S. culpability and everything from the rise of narco gangs in Latin America to the rise of Al Qaeda and ISIS to the reactionary Islamic theocracy in Iran to the failure of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process to the war in Western Sahara. I am I'm not all hesitant at blaming the United States, where the United States has indeed been the major contributor to a problem. The United States has been mostly at fault for something. But in light of this, I want to make it very clear that the United States is not primarily at fault for the war in Ukraine. This is very much Russia's doing. And it doesn't mean I'm not uncritical of certain aspects of U.S. policy, which may have been unnecessarily provocative. But the blame is squarely with the Kremlin. So let me address some of these. You address some of these have been addressed previously. I'll try to cover some new ground or expand on a couple of things. Secretary of State James Baker did appear to have made a promise to the Kremlin that NATO would not expand eastward, but that was not. There was never a treaty, never a formal agreement. I wish it had been. Russia's been invaded, from Europe, from Western Europe through Ukraine in 1812, 1914, 1919, 1941. I mean, you understand they might have a little paranoia along these lines, but it's not like the U.S. forced these Eastern European countries to become aligned with it. I mean, obviously, the U.S. wanted it to expand. I mean, it was real profitable for American arms manufacturers because they had to shift their militaries from the Russian models to the compatible with the U.S. But they wanted to join. I mean, if I was a Eastern European, I would have opposed becoming part of NATO. I know some people who were, but we'd be in a distinct minority. In fact, military budgets among the Eastern European countries actually declined from the Warsaw Pact days. So this idea that they're arming up to threaten Russia doesn't really seem to have any grounds at all. And the thing is though I strongly believe that U.S. imperialism is the number one, threat to the world. If you're in Eastern Europe, your perspective is different because historically it's been Russia and the Soviet Union that has been the threat. And them and even Ukraine wanting to be part of NATO, again, I oppose that, but it is their right, just as much as Cuba's right to want to ally with the Soviet Union or Sandinista to Nicaragua back in the Cold War as well. And again, given the very real threat from the United States on their sovereignty, it seemed to be a rational choice. And I think that's how we need to look at Eastern Europe as well. There's kind of West-splaining, you might call it, when it comes to looking at our policy there. It denies agency to Ukrainians and other Eastern Europeans for their own choices, even though those of us on the Western left may or may not agree with them, but they're not. It is very much their choice. And besides, when you see how Putin has repeatedly talked about how Ukraine is this not a distinct nation, they've always been part of Russia, I mean, frankly, I think he would have invaded anyway, regardless of the eastward expansion of NATO, regardless of not ruling out Ukraine's neutrality, even though I think both of those would have been good things. Even though we did engage in a kind of Cold War triumphalism that belittled Russia as a major power and fueled Putin's kind of reactionary nationalism. But again, I think Russia would have done it anyway. I mean, why did they do it? I don't know. I kind of go back to reminds me of Noam Chomsky's argument, which I think is really quite accurate when he talked about U.S. intervention in Latin America. I mean, the idea of Sandinista Nicaragua or Cuba or Chile under Allende being a threat to the United States in any kind of strategic manner was ridiculous. What they constituted, what these socialist experiments constituted, was what Noam has referred to as a threat of a good example. And I think that's, in many ways, that's how Russia might have seen Ukraine, because they finally got in Zelensky. Zelensky was an outsider. You know, he wasn't part of the corrupt pro-Western bloc. He wasn't part of the corrupt pro-Russian bloc. He was not connected to the oligarchs. I mean, he was really an outsider who really wanted to clean up the political system and really move Ukraine to a more European, a democratic kind of a model. I mean, he's definitely too neoliberal for my taste, but I think he was generally wanting to, make Ukraine a much better functioning, system after 30 years of this incredible corruption and competing oligarchic factions and that kind of thing, become a regular European style democracy. And I think that's what threatened Russia, because if Ukraine could be successful in that, given their historical, linguistic, and other cultural ties to Russia, there are a lot of Russians would be demanding the same thing. And I think that's really what got the Russians uptight. I mean, Putin, he somehow seems to combine some of the worst elements of the Tsarist and the communist in one. I mean, it is really an awful regime. There's nothing progressive about it. I mean, he's a white supremacist, Islamophobic, anti-LGBTQ. I mean, he's much closer to Trump, to Le Pen, to Orban, to the to Bolsonaro, to Modi. I mean, he's very much in this kind of dangerous right-wing populism. And in terms of social inequality, I mean, as screwed up as the Soviet system was in certain ways, at least it was a fairly egalitarian system. At least they're on the sides of progressive struggles during most of the world. But Russia today, is one of the most unequal societies in the world, and they really are supporting these dangerous reactionaries. Another thing I should mention about as someone who's been involved in anti-nuclear stuff, disarmament stuff, back for many decades, is that the Russian invasion is a direct violation of the 1994 Budapest Agreement, in which Ukraine agreed to destroy its nuclear weapons inherited from the Soviet Union in return for guarantees of its territorial integrity. And the United States, among other countries, were co-signatories of this, that we tried to guarantee that territorial integrity. And so this not only gives some legal rationale for supporting Ukraine, but the Russian invasion itself is a major setback to non-proliferation, just as the U.S. invasion of Iraq after they actually got rid of their nuclear programs. I mean, both of these acts of aggression give the message that maybe a country needs nuclear weapons after all as a deterrent to prevent being invaded. And I think it's a very dangerous lesson that could lead to very dangerous nuclear proliferation. And I think there's a tendency among many in the left. I mean, we've been lied about, like we were lied to about Vietnam, we were lied to about Central America, we were lied to about Southern Africa, we were lied to around the arms race. We were lied to about Israel and Palestine, we were lied to about Iraq. So people sort of assume that therefore we're being lied to about Russia and Ukraine. And again, there's some issues. There's the things I take issue with the Biden administration. I'll mention these in a moment. In this case, the basic analysis of the situation, that this is an unprovoked act of aggression in violation of international law. I think that is basically accurate. I want to mention, though, that I don't think that this is why the United States is supporting Ukraine. If Biden really I remember Biden just a couple of weeks ago said, this is the first time since World War II for something like this to happen, where a country sends 100,000 troops, streaming across the border into a sovereign country, forgetting that 120 years ago, getting it 20 years ago, he was one of the right-wing minority of Democrats who supported the US invading Iraq with 130,000 troops. He also says no country can unilaterally change international boundaries. No country can expand its territory by force. His administration, the US government, is the only country in the world that has formally recognized Israel's illegal annexation of Syria's Golan region in direct violation of a series of UN Security Council resolutions, and the only government that's formally recognized Morocco's illegal annexation of the entire country of Western Sahara, also in violation of a series of UN Security Council resolutions, as well as a landmark decision of the International Court of Justice. So, I mean, if you look in US maps, from the US government, you'll, in Rand McNally or National Geographic or Google or whatever, you'll see Western Sahara as a separate country, or at least with hash marks or some kind of special, delineation to show its separateness. US government maps, all one country. US government reports about Western Sahara, it's just a part of Morocco, and same thing with Israel and the Golan. So the US can hardly take a moral high ground. Again, doesn't mean they're right about Ukraine, but that's not what's doing. Getting the United States to support Ukraine is a geopolitical thing about Ukraine. Now, sometimes a country can do the right thing for the wrong reasons, but I think even those of us who do strongly support the Ukrainian struggle, should not be naive about the U.S. And its way it's traditionally supported occupying armies. We could also look at Ukraine and look at Indonesia and East Timor, or Israel's illegal annexation of Greater East Jerusalem and the settlements and the like. Now, I also want to talk about Maidan briefly, and that is, I just want to underscore, and I've also written books about people power movements, civil resistance campaigns that have overthrown autocratic governments, countering the U.S. line that can only take place through regime change through foreign invasion or whatever. Yes, I do want to underscore that the Maidan, that the United States did not play a significant role at all in the uprising. That we have the notorious phone call from Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary of State, who tried to manipulate the formation of the new government. But that was after Yanukovych had fled. I mean, the idea that hundreds of thousands, and actually millions, if you include the support and strikes and things like that, Ukrainians would not go out in sub-zero temperatures for weeks because some foreign power told them to. I mean, the Ukrainians are incredibly nationalistic. They don't want to be puppets of the US anymore. They want to be puppets of Russia. They did it because, they were really fed up with Yanukovych, a kleptocrat and increasingly authoritarian. Yes, there were some neo-Nazis in the mix, including some militia that stormed some government buildings at the very end. But that was after Yanukovych had fled. The government collapsed when government workers went on a de facto strike in protest of a massacre of protesters, and in large part sympathy for them. Again, this is the same kind of stuff that brought down dictators in other parts of the world, Mubarak and Ben Ali and Marcos and Milosevic and others. This is not something the U.S. Created. Similar to this idea, we spent $5 billion to support it. That quote from Nuland is talking about all foreign aid from the United States since Ukraine's independence, including when there were some pro-Western governments in power we presumably did not want to overthrow. So again, the U.S. through the National Endowment for Democracy and others did support some opposition groups. Again, these are more in terms of how you monitor elections, get your word out, register voters, civic engagement, that kind of thing. There's no training about strategic nonviolent action. There is nothing about how you, the kind of the largely spontaneous uprising by ordinary Ukrainians who are really fed up. And now again, we could argue, well, maybe they should have accepted the compromise agreement for the early elections, and maybe they shouldn't have pressed so hard. Again, one could certainly critique them, but it was their choice. It was their actions. It was the Ukrainians. It was not the United States. And again, as I said earlier, and people who know my work know I am not above criticizing and blaming the US for something when they are when that kind of blame is due. And the idea the United States can somehow export revolutions, I mean, that's just a mirror image of Reagan, saying it was the Soviets that were exporting revolutions. I mean, the US could no more make people in Ukraine or Iran or Serbia or whatever rise up against an autocratic ruler they don't like than the Soviets could make the Vietnamese or the Angolans or the Nicaraguans rise up against their oppression. Yes, they can provide arms, we can provide some money, but that doesn't make a revolution. And again, this is a question of agency. And let's give credit to the Ukrainian people and not follow into this kind of simplistic view that it's all only about great powers and ordinary trying to spread their influence, and that it's not about we need to acknowledge that ordinary people, ordinary Ukrainians, were the ones who were in the forefront of this from the get-go. And this is not a proxy war. Even if the US suddenly cut off arms tomorrow, the Ukrainians would keep fighting. They would keep fighting. I mean, they are determined to risk this invasion. Now, if there's time, I can talk about US arms and aid and that kind of thing, but I have a feeling I'm running out of time here.
Yeah, I think we should move on to question and answer, and hopefully you'll have plenty of opportunity to add whatever you want to add. We're an hour and 10 minutes in. We had about, I don't know, 50 or 60 people with us today. So for something that was organized on 5 or 6 days notice, I thought that's pretty good. Steph is going to help me with some of the question answer, and I see Vladislav has his hand up, and I am going to spotlight you, sir. Let's go on here.
Great. I want to make some few comments about speech. Thank you for your solidarity and acknowledging our subjectivity. I think it's really important, and a lot of people just, I don't know, very xenophobically ignore that Ukrainians can do something without US imperialism having them by their strings and forcing do the revolution and all of this stuff. So it's very important to acknowledge. I want to add a few remarks, a few things. Just you said about Budapest memorandum and denuclearization of Ukraine. I think it's very important. Ukraine was the second country in the world to give up its nuclear arsenal, and first country wasn't very didn't give nuclear weapons for a good reason. South Africa gave it because of racist reasons. Mm-hmm. So practically, the fact that Ukraine was pioneering anti-nuclear movement, and it gave its arsenal, and it also signed treaties about demilitarization. So Russian invasion not only is a great threat for anti-nuclear movement and fight against nuclear weapons, but also a threat against demilitarization takes. So it was an invasion of country who actively demilitarized its military and tried to just, straight up cut the most strategic bombers, tanks, and rocket supplies that practically created the situation that it was very vulnerable to the invasion, unfortunately. And this invasion forced a lot of countries to militarize, to again rewrite their military budgets. And if Russia will win this war, it means more hostilities, more militarization, and more nuclear threat. So there is also this dimension. I liked the example of Latin America. There's a phrase of America background, and Russian takes about Ukraine, and Eastern Europe practically the same. That is Russian background, and US shouldn't intervene. It's like Russian Monroe Doctrine. I don't think that we should give any legitimacy to such policies and such takes, nor in US so-called sphere of influence in Latin America, and their so-called right to do everything, overthrow leaders and to push their interests. No Russian in the Eastern Europe. No matter any deals between Russia and America, if speaks about NATO expansion and like deals that Eastern European country wouldn't be accepted in NATO, if this discussion was done without Eastern European countries and without popular participation of their democratically elected government and their representatives, they have no legitimate take. Even if Russia and US strike some deal, they cannot discuss questions that are directly concerned about Ukraine's sovereignty above Ukrainian head. No matter what the deal, was it signed or was it just oral speaks and so on. It's very important that these countries have legitimacy and have subjectivity to decide for their own and not to be somewhere background of someone. So, so I think it's very important. And just last things is to say that struggle against Russian imperialism now is incredibly interconnected. Russia practically the sole reason that the Syrian regime is now still strong with authoritarian leader of Assad. Russia trades with North Korea, strengthening its dictatorship. Russia directly supports Iran, and with trade deals, Iranian authoritarian regime provides Russia with drones to strike Ukraine, and Russia provides Iranian regime with money to suppress its people. So struggle against Russian imperialism is interconnected and universal as a struggle for democracy, for people's participation, and so on. And the defeat of Russian imperialism is defeat for authoritarianism all over the world. And not only authoritarianism of such countries as Syria and Iran, but also of Trumpism, Modi government, and all the far-right movements in Europe that put their faith in Putin as like a person to personify some new world orders that they want to live in. Like Trump pushes for cutting weapons for Ukraine. Modi tries to be the bridge and try to balance all of the sides, practically taking pro-Russian sides without like accepting any sanctions. Far-right movements are openly pro-Russian in Europe, including, for example, Le Pen, who visited Putin and who made a lot of pro-Russian posts and so on. So defeat of Russian imperialism is also defeat of far-right movements all over the world. And the last thing that I want to say is there was a quote about USSR having some progressive side, egalitarian, and so on. I think, unfortunately, there's a strong lack of good Sovietology on the West and understanding all of the character of Soviet Union, of authoritarian regime, of all of the anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, and imperialism that was done by Soviet Union. And I think that we shouldn't like say that there was some good sides in it, because it was such horrible empire that invaded Afghanistan, that Russified Ukraine, that were practically having some kind of apartheid against Muslim population, against non-white population, and was incredibly structured regime of Russian supremacy and totalitarian character, including about democracy and so on. So it's also one of the reasons why countries who left the Soviet Union generally feel very threatened by Russia and have very legitimate concerns because they have a very strong history of oppression by Russia. Yeah, I also read recently autobiography of one Soviet scientist who was on trial in Soviet Ukraine, and like first 5 minutes of trial was saying that he is a Jewish Zionist, that he just works for Israeli government and so on and so on. And then there comes one guy and saying he is 100% Ukrainian. He is not Jewish. And after this, all speakers take a few minutes and start. He's abandoned it. He's Ukrainian nationalist. And so he was jailed for being Ukrainian nationalist after all. So this is how progressive was USSR in their policies. So just this remark. And I think that's what I wanted to cover. And thank you again for your speech and your genuine position of solidarity, and not only against Russian imperialism, but very universal that all imperialism should be opposed, including American one, without any illusion, and that we should strive for world orders that built on the basis of democracy and not supporting any imperialism. So yeah.
Thank you, sir. There's been, I want to jump in. There's been a lot of question and answer. Stephanie and other people and Yosh have been trying to answer questions as they come up. Like one big question is like, well, what next? Well, we're trying to figure that out. This is our first event. We're going to have more events. We want to continue highlighting progressive leftist voices in Ukraine. I know we've made some good contacts so far. One part of that is there is a faction of us in Veterans for Peace who want to investigate how do we stand in solidarity with Ukraine in the context of Veterans for Peace. For example, Veterans for Peace, we don't want to be advocating arms for anybody anywhere. That's not our role. But at the same time, there are many of us deeply concerned about people using Veterans for Peace as a platform to uncritically advance what we believe is Russian talking points, a Russian narrative, Russian propaganda, to the detriment of people in Ukraine who are struggling against a imperialist war machine. So that's our contradiction. So if you're interested in trying to figure this out with us, VFP4Ukraine.org, you can find us, Veterans for Peace for Ukraine.org. And we're going to be figuring this out within a Veterans for Peace context. And of course, all of us individually have to figure out how do we best stand with Ukraine in general. Now, we've had a lot of dudes talking here, including myself. And
thank you.
I want to make sure, Yosh, I see you there, and I'm going to spotlight you. And I want to make sure if you have anything else to say tonight, if you had any questions for anybody, that you had the opportunity to do so.
I saw Steph raised hand, so maybe she wanted to.
Yes, I want to say, Yosh, I know that a lot of people, when they are overcome by just sort of the larger political scheme, but on a one-to-one level, I want to ask, what can we, or me as a woman, what can I do to support someone on an individual basis internationally? What could I, as a citizen of the US, help you, Yosh, do for Ukrainian women and to promote your work and to continue the good work that you do on a daily basis?
Thank you for this question. I saw a similar question and answered that question in chat, and I think it's no such specific things about women. And I want to highlight that for our community, for our organization, is more important feminist agenda and feminist perspective. It's not about women itself, but more about our vision of our future without any kind of discrimination and violence. And we build this solidarity between and this community between all people of all genders who share this vision. And what how can you support us in this struggle is that to share, to highlight, and to help us to spread our voices, to help us to speak up. And because for example, when we are going to make one international project with German feminist artists who will help us to reach German audience with our messages, because when we share our ideas and our voices, it is not always understandable for broad audience in different countries. So to help to cover our or to broaden our messages, to communicate properly in a such way that will be understandable for your friends, for your comrades, for your politicians. It is very helpful, and to build more spaces where this dialogue and these connections will be possible directly between people. It is also so important, because we saw that especially in the USA, in the countries which are so far away from Ukraine, this all these events seems like some fictional and so surreal maybe. And it's to remind that our people are dying every day, and the war continues. And I understand that it can be something that people are tired to hear constantly about this, but we should find ways how to continue to speak about this in order to stop this war fast, and to also to recover and to build recovery program for Ukraine properly in order to not lose our democratic development, and to be even more strong and even more appreciating what our freedom and our previous achievements for human rights, etc.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yosh. We're gonna wrap up because we could be here all night, and I can't hold everybody hostage. So I'm sorry. Professor Zunes, do you have any closing remarks you want to share with us?
I just want to briefly say that in terms of what's next, I could tell you what the U.S. should do definitely on so many issues, but to be honest, it's really hard to say here. I mean, kind of on the one hand, this is on one hand, one can make an argument that this is one case where U.S. military aid is justified. I mean, given all the tyrants and occupation armies and human rights abusers we arm, this seems to would be a legitimate case, and for helping a country resist foreign aggression. On the other hand, there's question of given that it's kind of a stalemate, it's almost a World War II kind of trench warfare where people are getting slaughtered on both sides, and is it worth the cost? Given where the final line is, a few 100 kilometers this way or that way. I mean, there is a moral argument they're about cost and benefit, including, of course, the risk, albeit fairly small, but a real risk that could escalate to nuclear war. I mean, ultimately, it's up to the Ukrainians, and I think they're pretty determined to continue fighting. But you even have some very mainstream political scientists like Graham Allison who are saying, "Hey, well, maybe we should just have a ceasefire in place, have Ukraine, prosper and be a little west, and then eventually the rest of Ukraine will want to join it, just like East Germany eventually joined West Germany." And one can make that argument as well, but regardless of whether one thinks should be about the question of U.S. military aid and about other aspects of the key is to let's not rationalize in any way, shape, or form for Russian aggression. Let's provide, let's give the Ukrainians the agency and the respect that they deserve in their struggle. Let's not rewrite history, because again, the U.S. is at fault for many, many, many things, but Ukraine is not primarily the fault of the tragedy in Ukraine is not primarily a fault of the U.S. And let's and I think if we get our analysis right, I think we can might do a better job at figuring out what to do next.
All right, thank you. That is it. In the chat, I have a link to the Feminist workshop where you can support Yosh's organization and contact her there. Vladislav, if people are interested in learning more about the organizations you work with, what's the best way to do that?
I will probably send a Facebook link to our page, and
what's that group called?
Социальный рух. I hope it's not that hard to pronounce for non-Ukrainians. It's means in English social movement, and I will just send you the link on the Facebook and on our website, so you can find our articles, opinions, and be updated about what Ukrainian left are doing, thinking.
I had good luck Googling social movement Ukraine, looking for you. So people might, there you go. So that's in there. Thank you, everybody. I know this was long. I think from the question and answer, this was very worthwhile, and we're gonna do this again. So again, thank you. Thank you to our friends in Ukraine. It's 1:30 in the morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Yosh. All right. Good night. Good night, friends.
Bye, and thank you for this event and for solidarity.
And solidarity.